Hey everybody, I'm Jesse, producer of the No Quitting the Home Team podcast. I wanted to give a quick disclaimer in that while we hope anyone who listens would gain wisdom and insight from Dave and Renee's conversations, this is still a podcast intended for married couples, and to that end there will occasionally be dialogue around sexual intimacy and other related topics. So, for those of you who may be single and particularly sensitive to this subject matter, or those who may be listening at home or in the car with their kids around, we wanted to give you a heads up in advance so that you might continue listening at your own discretion.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of No Quitting the Home Team. I'm Renee.
I'm Dave.
I'm Jesse.
We're so glad you joined us today as we review another marriage book.
Yes, one more.
Yeah.
One more down the brain pipe.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
It just means we've just been
Cramming it. We've just been cramming them down.
Oh my gosh. When we set out on this adventure of reading 12 marriage books,
One per week.
I thought, man, it's going to be such a journey for us. It's such a and it is, but now that we're kind of right in the middle of this project, I just
Is
feel,
it a journey like learning to love to eat your vegetables journey?
Well, I feel like yes, but I have to eat it.
Right.
Like
right.
I got to eat it like
on a time frame.
on a time frame.
Yep.
Tomorrow.
Right.
I've learned that in order to actually finish the book with all of our other things, I have to start tomorrow or
Right.
even tonight on the
Right.
next
On the
one.
next book. Yeah.
So anyway, that's the brain pipe. Just got to
Right.
shove it down.
Shove it down.
Yeah, it's almost like a semester course where you have 12 books you have to read this semester for this class.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
That's
That's
about
it.
how.
Except nobody's paying me to do this.
That's right.
You're kind of getting paid to do this. This is kind of job,
Well, I'm employed
related.
by Fellowship Denver.
Yeah,
that is
so-
true.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to send me a little stipend to continue doing this,
It's going to be an ad for like
sponsors.
Athletic Greens
That's
or
right.
Better Health.
Better
next
health.
episode.
Yep.
Yeah.
There won't be.
We digress. Do you want to give a little plug to the book, or you just want to jump into how we're doing?
Okay, so the book for today, it's a Christian marriage book. We were just talking before starting this that it's been around for a while. It was published in 1999.
Don't mention the name because I'll introduce it later.
Okay.
Just give
It
a
was
little teaser.
Published in 1999, which my immediate thought was, oh, that's not that long ago. And the two of you immediately corrected me that actually was a while ago.
It was almost a quarter of a century ago.
Yeah, that's true. But okay, so here's what I like about this book, and here's the little teaser.
Make it brief.
Do you want to take ownership of your relationship with your spouse? Or do you feel like your relationship is sort of out of your control, or that you're kind of passively watching your relationship unfold, and maybe in a way that you don't like? If that's where you're at, this book will be really helpful for you.
Agency. It's about agency.
All about agency.
Good. Okay. Well, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good. We record on Thursdays, and most Thursdays it's kind of like the grand finale of our work week.
It's a push.
And so, we start super early. We have meeting, podcast, meeting, and then we have dinner tonight, and then we have more people coming over late tonight. So I am feeling a little frantic. Have a wedding this weekend out of town. So
You're taking my car. You're taking my one and only form of transportation.
I know.
Or of automobile transportation, I
I was
guess.
going to say,
We have
you
bikes.
got
We have
those
bikes.
two things attached to your legs the
we
good
do.
Lord gave
That's
you.
true. That's true.
Yeah.
No, I'm considering walking to a party. We were invited to a 10th anniversary wedding party of some really good friends. And I'm considering walking there on Saturday night.
Yeah. Because the wedding that I'm doing, I'm going with Ian.
Right.
And so
It's in Vail.
It's in Vail. Renee's staying here with Will and Beckett. But I have to have the car because
Yep.
I can't ride my bike to Vail. I suppose I
You
could, but I won't.
Okay.
So, but anyway,
You're just feeling a little frazzled.
I'm feeling a little frazzled. Yes.
Well, I'm going to answer. I'm going to kind of have a long-winded answer.
Oh,
because I was
let's go.
thinking it's a circuitous kind of response. So hang with me.
Okay.
I was thinking when I was driving here how I was going to answer this, and something came into my mind that I thought would be interesting to throw out there. I think we relationally have grown. You have in empathy within the last, I don't know, year, 6 months. And I've often tried to pinpoint why, like what's happened. And something came to mind that I think has really helped you grow in empathy, which I think is really helpful in relationships, right?
What?
So I remember when I was telling you the story about my hairstylist situation.
Yes.
So not in a moment of conflict, but in a moment of just sharing a glimpse into how I see things or my world. So I'm in desperate need of a haircut, but I'm in a conundrum because I go to this salon and I went to this one girl for a long time and she was gone for a while. So she referred me to her friend who has a chair right next to hers. And I liked the other girl better and pretty significantly better. So then the next couple of times I scheduled with the other girl and I have to see the original girl. And I think her feelings are hurt. She like gives me like the stink eye every time I do it. And so now in good, true Renee fashion, I'm avoiding her. I'm avoiding the situation and I'm in desperate need of a haircut. So I'm sharing this with Dave, to which you had no category for this scenario happening.
Right.
Or you ever feeling any of this pressure or tension, right?
Right. That relational tension of
Right.
what will my stylist think when she sees me with another stylist.
But I think giving you like just a funny story and not a heated moment of what it feels like to be me or in
Yes.
my world, I think it's made you more empathetic when similar situations arise that you might intuitively feel very different how you would respond, but knowing kind of what it feels like to be me. So I just think you've really grown in, and I think it makes us feel closer. It makes me feel more known. It makes me feel less judged. And often now I think you laugh at things that you think you're amused by situations where you might have been a little judgy
Yeah, or like dismissive.
or anyway, I think sharing little glimpses into like, this is how I see things has been a useful practice to feel closer.
Yeah.
And to feel more known. And
Oh, that's. I really appreciate you mentioning that.
would you agree?
I would totally agree. Well, you telling me that story has given me an opportunity to love you, like and by knowing you better, and now I appreciate the the emotional complexity that you have.
And I would say not. I think this is probably a situation more unique to women than, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm generalizing, but
I think so. Although the point though is that it's this
Right.
is what you feel.
this is how I see things or
Yeah.
how I feel things or how I experience things. And when it's so dry, I mean, I live in essentially a frat house. I mean, I have 3 almost teenage boys.
Yeah, spot the
And
lie.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's been helpful in our relationship in ways that seem surprisingly greater than I would have anticipated.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, and thanks for given me a window into sort of your world in a way that I didn't really appreciate before.
And more urgently, what should I do? Because I'm in desperate need of a haircut. I'm in desperate need of a haircut.
So original person that you liked better.
Yeah. No, I like the original person.
It's
I
just the
don't
original
like.
person.
Oh.
So I started going to the salon to see this one person.
Yeah.
And then she was gone, and she referred me to her friend
Yeah.
who was right next door to her.
Then she came back.
And then she was just gone for vacation.
Yeah.
So then I like the second person better. So
Just
every
keep going
time
with the person you like.
I know, but then every time I go in, I get it's
Smile.
tense.
Just smile at her.
No,
That ain't your
Jesse,
fault.
Jesse,
tense.
you're not doing it right.
I know I'm not, but here's the thing. There's a reason I've
I
gone
feel
to the.
so bad. I feel like I've betrayed. I feel like
Yeah.
I've betrayed my husband.
The difference is
I didn't make a
you don't have a
solemn vow.
covenant. Yeah, you don't have a covenant with
Yeah.
mediocre
I
hairdresser.
know.
And watch her listen.
I
And
know.
she's like,
I know.
oh, so
That's why I
that's how
didn't
you
mention your
feel.
name. I
No, you're
know.
fine. I'll just say there's a reason I've gone to the same barber for 7 years.
Yeah, I know.
Because I found someone who knows how to cut my hair well. They know what to do. They're efficient, and it looks good every time. And that to me is more valuable than a couple of tense looks.
I know, right? I know. I've considered going to a whole different salon. That's the intensity of the situation.
Yeah,
I've considered just try starting over somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Flee the tension. Avoidance. That's not a red flag.
No, not
We
at all.
talked about that before.
I've talked about that before. Okay, let's get to the meat of the podcast.
Yes.
Let's get to the book.
Renee, why don't you
the
introduce
book
it for us?
is a Christian book called Boundaries in Marriage by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. John Townsend. And it is, like Dave mentioned earlier, it has been around for a quarter of a century and has been reprinted multiple times. So it's very widely read and referenced. So that's when we chose to.
And it was much lauded in a previous book that we read here called The Great Sex Rescue. It scored very highly on Gregoire's rubric of good books on marriage and sex. So that kind of stuck in my mind. Before reading this book, I hadn't read it before, so it was sort of kind of been in the ether of kind of evangelical world for a while. I did read their book on how people change.
Written
Probably
after or before this book?
I don't remember.
Is it more recent? You don't remember?
I don't remember kind of when it was published compared to this book, but it had some of the same concepts in it. But this is, obviously directed just for marriage. So mostly new for me as I was sort of working my way through it. But it's been around forever, and you can't go to probably any sort of Christian community or hang out with married people without someone mentioning you got to have boundaries. The language of boundaries is ubiquitous.
Pervasive, yeah. Yep.
Now, within sort of church world and beyond that as well, of course. But they've done a really good job explaining the function, value of boundaries, defining what boundaries, what it is and what it isn't. The whole last quarter of the book is sort of how this can be misapplied, which I appreciate them doing that. But yeah.
Before we kind of get into the pros and cons, the criticisms and the affirmation of the book, can you give a little elevator pitch summary of it?
Yes.
And even before that, very quick producer note, How People Grow is the book that followed this in 2004.
Okay.
Not to be confused with How People Change, which is a Paul Tripp book.
Oh, there
okay.
you go.
Okay.
I didn't read the Paul Tripp one, but I
Good
did
clarification.
Okay, great. So what's sort of the key insight? What's this book about? Boundaries. So creating boundaries in marriage. This is about developing self-control. It's not about creating a relationship dynamic that fosters selfishness, they're really talking about how do I take responsibility for myself, for my own actions, for my own thoughts? How do I take responsibility for the property line of my own life? So if you think of boundary, think of literal property lines. And you, as your own person, you are responsible for your own, think of your own person as like a property line. Well, around that property line, there's a boundary, there's sort of a fence. And you aren't ultimately responsible for other properties, but you are responsible for your own property.
Can I just add, he identifies areas for which you take responsibility, and it's feelings, attitudes, behaviors, choices, limits, desires, thoughts, values, talents, and love. I thought that was interesting to tease those out a bit.
So, absolutely. And it reminds me a lot of Renee when a few years ago we wrote our moral and family values. And one of our moral and family values was we take responsibility for our own emotions and actions.
Yeah.
Like here in the Moreland household, we have to take responsibility for what it is that we do and how we feel. We have to have our own agency within that. So this entire book...
So it's the antithesis of the Taylor Swift song, Look What You Made Me Do.
It's the opposite. It's the opposite of Tay-Tay, of what she has to say. Right. So why this is so great is because it's incredibly empowering. If you're in a relationship that is causing you to be diminished in your own personhood, or your well-being is beginning to wane, oftentimes the kind of depression that settles in is there's nothing I can do to change my spouse. There's nothing I can do to make her like this or to make him like that. Or I've tried to get him to change and he just won't do it. This entire book is really about how not to focus on your spouse, but really how to regain agency for you.
Yeah.
How it is that you respond to the thing that you don't like, and having responsibility for your own actions and reactivity to the things you don't like.
And the change in your spouse is could be a byproduct, but is not what you focus on.
It isn't. A key insight is that you can't change your spouse's character. You can change your own. Now, obviously, if you do that, then it does impact your spouse in potentially significant ways. So as a basic kind of mindset shift, this can be incredibly beneficial to couples. It is powerful because it shifts literal power dynamics in the relationship and how a spouse responds to all of a sudden, I used to be able to quote unquote get away with X, Y, or Z with my relationship with my spouse. And now he doesn't put up with that anymore. It does shift the power in the relationship. And as a result of that, it will shift sort of how you connect with one another. And there's sort of a whole series of renegotiations that could sort of spin off as a result of this. So, I mean, as I'm reading this, I'm like, hey, man, this could be really good. And this is sort of a hot weapon. Like it can be used, if used improperly, it could probably be pretty harmful in a relationship as well, which is why the last third of it is, this is how not to use this book. This is how not to use these insights.
I think it resonated with you more because I've heard you talk over the years about just how sort of the victim mentality creeps into relationships and people don't take agency and don't feel like don't necessarily think they can or feel like they can.
Yes.
So I think that piece resonated with you
Definitely.
a lot.
Well, the idea that maturity is actually like Christian maturity or completeness is actually you becoming a full person. Even the idea of perfect, like I'm doing air quotes, like the idea of maturity, completeness, is that you're actually you're a whole, complete person, and you are like you becoming mature before God is you taking responsibility for all of yourself, and that's growth. That's growth. And so, if someone is stuck in a difficult relationship, then part of growth for them is, how do I take responsibility for me to actually grow into the full person God's made me to be? Sort of regardless of the response of my spouse, I have to take responsibility for me.
Yeah. I think it would be helpful to tether this with an example. Like, because I thought that was helpful because it feels very esoteric.
Yes.
Talking about it. But give an example relationally. I mean, the book was chock full of them.
That's right.
But just give an example.
Most of which were straight out of 1950.
Yes.
That's another.
Yeah, that's a critique coming. But give an example that I think might help just see how this concept plays out.
So, an example they give numerous times is a version of this. So, let's say you are frustrated because your spouse consistently comes home late from work. And you've worked. So let's say, Renee, you're working all day, and I've made dinner, and I make it a point that I always have, like, we value our dinner time together, but consistently
6 o'clock we eat dinner.
Yeah. But consistently you come home at 6:15 or 6:30, and I've worked to do that. And when you do that, it sets me off, and I'm so upset, and I there's nothing I can seem to do that can get you to change from that behavior. They give versions of, like, so what do you do if you're stuck in that relationship? Well, here's what not to do.
Nag, or complain, or gripe, or
because that
shame,
that doesn't work. Ultimately, it doesn't work.
Which the motivation behind that is just trying to change the spouse's behavior.
Yes.
Like, I'm going to do whatever I can to make you behave in the way that I want you to.
Right. And so really to shift the responsibility from, I'm going to get you to get home early, to, I'm going to change how I respond when you come home.
Right. We're eating at 6, and then you can heat up dinner later if you're not there on time.
Yep. And we would love for you to be home. And if you can't be home, there's going to be dinner in the microwave for you. But we're having dinner at 6 o'clock. And so he gives that exact example.
Yeah.
And eventually, the spouse is sort of upset at first, and but I like having the hot dinner and whatever. But then the behavior actually does change for a while. But it changes because the spouse at home changed her attitude to, this is simply how I'm going to respond, rather than I'm going to get you to change. So
that would be framed as a boundary.
Yes. So it's a boundary around the spouse at home, around herself.
You switched the genders.
I know, I switched the genders because I was using us, just trying to be a good modern, using us as an example. But then the example he gives is more
because every
Yeah.
example in this book is a bit condescending and stereotypical.
Yeah, the man is at work and the wife is at home.
Is home spending too much money on the credit card or something.
Yeah, not cleaning the house.
Not cleaning the house.
So it's pretty cringy.
It was cringy.
But I think probably listeners at home kind of get it. Like it's about shifting responsibility to how I'm going to respond, not trying to get you to change.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of freedom there.
There is. Yeah.
Now, there is also kind of a line there you have to keep, because the consequence for a boundary is, I'm not going to rescue my spouse. So I've made it clear this is how I'm going to respond when this sort of, this a particular behavior kind of that's harmful happens. This is how I'm going to respond. And when that happens, it's important for the spouse to kind of do what he or she is sort of promised to do. Like, I'm not going to make you dinner. You have it in the fridge or whatever. And that's sort of there's going to be a sort of moment of truth. Are you going to be willing to do that?
Yeah, kind of the classic parental follow through with consequences. I do wonder, two thoughts came to mind when I was reading through this in regards to this issue. It does seem like in the heat of the moment, one might be more punitive, just based on our experience. In the heat of a fight, in the emotions of a conflict, particularly an often repeated offense. I just wonder how rational I would be to be able, my boundary would be so hyperbolic in the heat of the moment. Right. So it's great to talk about it in this context, but it almost seemed like to me to have a third party mediate what the boundaries are.
Which many of the examples,
right.
I would say all the examples they give, it's their clients, their couples
totally,
coming in
counseling.
for counseling.
Right.
So they
it just
are
seems like
that
how
third person.
hard it would be for even me personally.
Yeah.
If I'm just miffed about something you do over and over and over again, I don't know how magnanimous my boundary would be.
Right. And they talk about like you don't make boundaries in the moment. You don't spring boundaries up the purpose of a boundary is that it's not reactionary.
Right.
It's actually because that does become spiteful and you're angry. You want your spouse to kind of pay for what they've done.
Yep.
And so you don't make those boundaries sort of in the heat of the moment.
That's interesting to use that word because I actually thought of that word in the context of the whole book. That as a marriage philosophy, it seems like this approach is reactive, not proactive. Because I don't think I would encourage someone to go into marriage with all these boundaries set up.
Yeah.
Because that feels very territorial and almost like you're expecting dysfunction in all these areas. So it almost seems like this approach is reactive, where there's rub or where there's unresolvable conflict, not as a system to make sure you have in place on the front end.
Right. Yeah. Totally. I mean, I feel like the boundaries discussion comes up because they've been violated.
Right.
So there's pain.
Right.
That causes that is the agent for the discussion.
So in the sense, the whole method is reactive.
Right. Otherwise, you would already be two sort of mature people who have a well-defined sense of self and of responsibility for our own sort of behaviors and emotions.
So your comment that it shouldn't be reactive is actually it should be delayed reactive. It should be it should be contemplative reaction.
It should be responsive, not reactive.
Okay, that's a good clarification.
So, but they have this whole like a chapter. You remember where it's the principles of boundaries, and one of the principles they mention is the principle of proactivity, that you want to try to get ahead of the repeated issue, and so that you are protected from your own sort of reactive kind of tendencies.
Right. What do you think? I think though, in the context of our relationship, there are issues that are repeated that cause frustration, and they're kind of 1-off, 2-off, 3-off things that I feel like we just try to be gracious with each other, and don't make it a thing and like a boundary thing. And where would you say that line is? Because I would hope that something happens and there's an issue that initially the initial response could just be gracious and And I understand like I said, we have issues that come up over and over and over again. And that seems like more a time when something more formal and structured and intentional like this would come in. Would you agree or no?
Yes. They do make it, they kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth a little
Right,
bit
I thought
with
that
this.
too.
Because on the one hand, they're like, hey, boundaries are really important. On the other hand, they say make as little as little or as minimal rules as possible in your marriage. And they repeat this line that is actually a nice little quip where they're like, if you live with a judge, you're always on trial.
Right.
Like if you live constantly kind of on eggshells about not wanting to overstep your bounds, then you're never going to be in a naked and unashamed sort of relationship. They don't use that language, but it's implied.
You love that phrase.
I do. I do.
I think it
essence.
surfaces in every podcast.
Well, it's the essence of marriage.
He's not wrong.
So I do think if you get, it's easy to get high centered on creating really clear boundaries that then can become barriers.
Right, because
in a
we're human
relationship.
beings. We're human beings.
Yeah.
And yeah, it seems a little kind of the sentiment I feel when you hear the pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like you're the creator of your own destiny. You can do it. You can create a marriage that everything's in a neat little box and no one oversteps. And I felt a little bit like that when I read it. Did you?
Yeah. And with a little bit of like, let me kind of tell it to you straight.
Yeah.
It was a little preachy.
Yeah. I hated how there were just little verse bolt-ons that were completely taken out of context. A lot of them. I mean, some weren't. Some spoke to human character or whatever. But I felt like it, to give validity, I mean, it's a Christian book after all.
Yeah.
There would just be this little, let's just tag on a little scripture that doesn't really relate to this, but kind of.
Right. Because we appreciate exegesis and like, what is that passage actually saying? So we're, I think, immediately suspicious of anyone who's making an argument.
Right.
And then tags on a verse that's only like tangentially
Related.
connected to the
Right.
point that they're making.
Right. I thought that happened a lot.
Yeah. Well, yes. They also they quoted from Proverbs a lot, and Proverbs does lend itself, I think, to sort of general kind of maxims and basic sort of truths about the way the world works. So some of that I think fit, but then other sort of more gospel focused points felt a little like a bit of a mishit, or at least a stretch.
Stretch, yeah.
So something a principle that they did surface that is a biblical principle that I think is interesting in the context of marriage. I'm still not. I'm kind of like yes and no on it, but it's one of the principles of boundaries itself, which is you reap what you sow.
Right. That was kind of their first. That was kind of the main point when they delved into the particular points within the philosophy.
And it's this idea that you have to know the difference between pain and injury. And in order for to get your spouse to grow is a consequence of you having a boundary and of them crossing that boundary is that they have to reap what they sow.
Right.
Which means their life is going to become more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you're introducing pain.
Yeah. Which could produce anger, resentment, all the things.
Yes,
Yeah.
all the things. And if they don't have a category to put that pain in, like they're assuming that your spouse has a category to put that pain in. But if they don't, which we know experientially, a lot of people don't.
Right.
That pain can go all kinds of different ways.
Right.
Like it can come out in a lot of weird dysfunctional ways. So, but assuming it's a decent container, then that pain is useful to cause change.
Yeah.
So it creates the tension. It's just like any adaptation. That tension is created, and then development happens, and that's how people get mature. They grow.
Yeah.
And that's how change.
Do you think though
happens.
most people, and it's hard to categorize grossly like this, but I feel like most people, like I know a friend right now, she put up a boundary, a very needed, warranted boundary, and her husband had an affair and they're divorced and in a nasty custody battle now, right? Do you feel like people are healthy enough to respond to boundaries well? Because it seems like, to me, and it almost need, and I mentioned this earlier, but it almost needs to be a third party putting the boundary.
Yeah.
Because I just don't know if people are generally healthy enough to do that.
I feel like that observation is pertinent, not just in marriages with boundaries, but more generally in society.
Totally.
I think
Totally.
in order, for a society to function, it actually requires a certain level of civility and
Totally.
and human character development in order for us to interact and deal with differences and yet still be in relationship with each other. That seems to be diminishing sort of in Western society.
Society-wide.
And I think marriage is sort of a classic sort of manifestation of that. So I think generally speaking, people don't have a capacity to deal with that, with a boundary or with that discomfort.
If implemented by one of the spouses.
Yes.
Because I do think having a third party takes a little bit of the emotion out of it. It deflates the intensity a little bit.
Yes.
Because it's like, well, they said I had to do this. Like, the counselor said this. Instead of, I'm the cause of this pain. My decision, because my friend implemented a boundary that was, anyone would say, it was completely needed and appropriate.
Right.
And now, I just wonder how many people could handle that well in our current climate within the context of current modern day marriages.
Yeah, I think if assuming both people have a genuine commitment to Jesus and are willing to submit to his will in their life, then yes, I think this can go well. Which the assumption of these writers is that they're counseling Christian couples.
Yep.
And
but
they
I wonder
lean
if that
heavily
assumption
in that
in
commitment.
1999 it's a different landscape.
It is. And I think a lot of it is because of the victimhood culture.
Yep.
Where anytime you do anything to cause me pain,
Yep.
there's a narrative waiting for me that I can pour myself into that will paint you as the bad guy and me as the helpless victim here.
Yep.
And
The
that,
oppressed. The oppressed.
That narrative is waiting for any one of us.
Yep.
Anytime we experience pain. So, which is why I think even though it might seem dated right now, I appreciate this book because it's bringing to surface sort of an old-fashioned virtue of, in order to grow, we have to look honestly at our own faults. We have to take responsibility for ourselves. We can't scapegoat.
Right.
We have to honestly assess how I behave actually has impact in someone else's life.
Yep.
I'm responsible for me, and I have to be respectful for how I behave, how it impacts you, and I have to be, and in order for me to be willing to change means I have to accept the pain and discomfort of me being limited or immature, and to hold on to that pain long enough for development to occur.
Yeah. I just think what you mentioned earlier, the narrative, cultural narrative is different. Whereas I think people would have seen that as an opportunity for growth, the pain as an opportunity for growth. Many now would see that as you're unsafe and you're attacking me and you're abusive.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. That all those not just the narratives, but the interpretation of allowing someone to experience pain
Yeah. Yeah.
and then twisting or coming at it from a perspective that pain is now in the category of abuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that's there for people
Yeah.
to take. But the fruit of that is that people remain immature
Right.
and marriages don't flourish.
Right. Right.
And community doesn't flourish.
Right.
You know, there's no longer the kind of sort of containers, emotional containers for people to actually bear with one another in reasonable ways. They're more and more sensitive. They're more and more
Yep.
fragile.
Yep.
They can actually handle less and less.
Yeah. So maybe in some ways this is not a great cultural fit, but very needed culturally. This strategy.
Yes, and I think that's why
It resonated so
it
much.
resonated with me.
I just couldn't get past the condescending stereotypes.
I know. So that's distasteful.
Yeah,
It was.
we need a revision. We need a 2023 revision.
Well, maybe that'd be our suggestion. If they come out with a 25-year anniversary
Yeah, maybe
version,
so.
they can do that.
Any parting shots about this book? I feel like we've
Yeah,
we've
I
discussed it
yeah, we've
fairly
done-
thoroughly.
I think so. A key insight, a parting shot. In order for someone to grow, so if you're thinking of like your spouse and yourself, and they're like, hey, always think about yourself and your own growth,
Yeah,
in the hopes that causes your
Right,
spouse to grow.
right.
But you can't take
the focus isn't on
Yeah.
the spouse's growth.
But there's always two factors for growth. One is the issue you need to grow in, and two is your ability to deal with the issue you need to grow in. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to identify here's an area of immaturity. It's another thing to identify am I in a place and do I have the ability or the capacity to deal with the thing that I need to deal with?
Yeah,
Those are two different things, but
Yeah.
both are actually necessary for growth to happen
yeah, I think that's
in
great.
yourself and in your marriage.
Yep. All right, so give us a 1 to 10 rating.
I think in terms of the need for the basic insight, this is a 9.
Oh wow.
And in terms of its readability
Yep.
and cultural kind of the exterior of it, there's some stuff you have to like work through. So I
Yep.
give that a 5.
Okay.
So I'd say 7.5
Okay.
total.
I think so. Not being a marriage counselor or ever probably not having the patience to go into counseling. Listeners, Dave is a very patient man. He's the most patient person I know. I am getting to the point where these books are a little like the Peanuts teacher, where it's kind of wah, wah, wah. And so I confess that this book kind of turned into that a little bit for me. And I was a bit dismissive with the examples. So I'm going to give it a 5 for me.
Woo!
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I think that's
I know. But I think our discussion, we kind of briefly interact about the books we're reading, but we really don't get into it until we're here at the podcast.
fair. Right.
So just having this discussion has actually helped me appreciate it more than when I walked in here.
Oh, well, great. And same with you. I think feel I could appreciate more that those stereotypical situations feel really dismissive and even degrading.
Yeah.
And why it would be hard to give it anything more than a 5. I get that.
Okay. All right. Can we tie a bow on boundaries in marriage?
Bye, boundaries. I'm establishing boundary right now.
I'm leaving my copy at the church if anyone wants it. It's not going back up to my bookshelf. I have limited book space.
My copy. We have 2 copies.
All right.
Next up,
How can I make your day better? I think you're up to ask me.
honey, how can I make your day better?
Today,
Today, right now.
gosh. I am dreading. I'm such a weenie when you're gone. I just don't like it when you're gone. And I feel for people whose spouses travel because I just don't do well. So maybe if you could get things stocked for me so that I could have a good weekend and don't have to, whether that's a nice bottle of wine for the football on Saturday night, maybe some food so I don't have to think so heavy about meals.
Yep. This is me literally taking notes right now.
You know, one other thing that just came to mind.
What?
If you could, since I'm not going to have a car, if you could arrange for Beckett to get to and from the birthday party on Saturday night, so I don't have to worry about that.
Okay.
Could you please arrange for someone to take Beckett to and from the birthday party on Saturday night?
Done.
Okay.
Okay, great.
That's how you can make my day better.
Okay, yay. I'll do it. I'll do it.
All right, one more surprise question.
Yeah, surprise question. And you have the surprise question for me?
I do, and I feel like we're kind of trending light, and I don't know if I might take us in a different direction.
Are we going to go dark?
Well, I don't know. So Dave and I, neither of us are big cursors, but occasionally we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably me more than you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Although,
just culturally, we were raised in environments where there was a high correlation between morality and language.
no cussing.
Which I think is very different than where we live now. I mean, I remember moving to England and the vicar of our church, like, cursed like a sailor from the pulpit. So I do think we're in a very different environment culturally, but
Yes.
we both have that kind of, and this hasn't happened in a long time, which is why I feel like I can ask about it. But it is so upsetting to you when we're fighting and I curse at you. Mm-hmm. It is so upsetting. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand. I just want you to unpack that a little bit.
Okay, it has been a while.
It's been a while.
My wife is listening with bated breath, by the way.
Okay.
Because similar dynamic in our home.
So,
And I just don't understand that because for me, I'm communicating depth or intensity
yes,
in a way that sets it apart from normal arguments.
right,
And it is so upsetting to you.
right. And for me, particular cuss words have such, you say intensity, I, in the moment, interpret it as sort of, sharp-edged knives sort of into my...
That I'm just bludgeoning
yeah,
you with?
piercing into my very soul. Like I experience it as super sharp, sort of into my person. And partially because those words, they do have such power into them that when used, they certainly communicate importance.
Right.
And meaning, and this is not to be taken lightly, which is, I know why it is that you sometimes would use those words. But for me, I have a hard time getting to the meaning behind them because the words themselves are so hurt. Like it's hard for me to recover to the point where I can actually
listen.
Get to the meaning behind it. So that's where, when we've talked about this, like, hey, please don't use those words. And I kind of feel like a little kid a little bit in saying that.
I don't think you've ever said to me, though, don't use those words when we're fighting. I mean, it's implied by your reaction and your posture, but you've never said that to me.
Haven't I? Thought
No.
I've said something along the lines of when you do use that word, or now people are wondering what these words are.
I know.
We put that disclaimer on here.
I mean,
If I
that's
start
more
using
about-
these
that's
words, are we
more
going to use our
about,
clean designation?
I don't
on,
think we have a clean designation.
we don't, but that warning is more about intimacy language and less about Dave's gonna drop some 4-letter words.
It's not Dave, it's me.
Yeah, fair play. I meant in reference, but yes.
So, but anyway, in terms of the question,
Yeah.
like to me, it's just the words themselves become a distraction.
So what can I do when it's that level of frustration? And like I said, it's happened probably 5 times in our
Not often.
not often.
Yeah.
But I need to have
Beckett did over here at once.
He did.
Yeah.
Oh well.
Yeah, he was pretty upset.
Well. Life's not perfect, kid.
Those words have meaning.
They do
It's,
have meaning.
You know?
No. I guess I don't know how else, because I can articulate clearly my level of frustration, but it doesn't seem to hit in the
Right.
same way.
Right.
And it isn't received at the level that I'm needing it to be communicated.
Part of the efficacy of those words
Exactly,
to begin with.
exactly.
Now, this is also
Now,
coming
Jesse, who are
from
you talking to right now?
Yeah, well, this is
Are
also
you
coming.
engaged in this conversation?
Yeah, well, this might be coming from a borderline overcusser over here, but I've always felt that the power of those words is partially what you assign to them, but there is a cultural weight to it,
Yeah.
and what has been beneficial for us is recognizing that if I do use those words, regardless of how casual or intense the conversation is, I'm using them intentionally.
Yeah.
It is not a filler like it can be for a lot of people. So if I say that word, that's the
Unless
word
you're
I
from
meant to say.
Boston.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying.
The F word is every filler.
The culture of our home is not such
Yeah.
that those words are used as filler. So if I use one of those words, it is because I meant to, and
Yeah.
what that evokes was by design.
Yeah.
Right. So
But that doesn't make me feel any better. It means you really mean it. You think I'm a effing blah, 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 blah. See?
what it means is that the depth of what that word makes you feel.
Jesse's on my side here.
I'm actually firmly on Renee's side, but and again, to the point where like Shell and I have had that conversation over like, hey, when we are in super intense conversations, that language is acceptable as long as we are not talking directly about one another.
Yeah.
That's where we've
Yeah.
landed. It's like
Yeah.
I can speak of situations in those
Yeah.
terms,
No, totally.
but if it is if there's accusatory language or
Yeah,
descriptive
totally.
language of a person, that's probably never okay.
Yeah.
At least in our home, that's not okay.
No, because you don't care at all when I call someone else an a-hole.
No.
You don't care at all. Like if I refer
Especially if they really are an a-hole.
See,
to... Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned the emotion. I mean, what I appreciate is that the meaning behind it is that you actually want to connect emotionally. Mm-hmm. And now you feel like you need to use sort of these loaded words to get to that place.
Yeah.
To be able to get my attention, so we can connect at that deeper level. And it's just from
That's a glass half full way of framing
well,
that.
that's you know who you've married.
It's true. It's true.
That's how I choose to interpret it.
Okay.
So, but experientially, from the receiving end, those words distract from that
That end goal. Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
it's a very, very similar place to where we have landed.
All right.
Well, cool. Great question, honey.
Yeah. Hey, I'm thinking.
Quit cussing, people. Stop that cussing.
All right. Let's get to the last category. What I'm into.
Honey, what are you into?
Well, what I'm into this week, you've actually made accusations about it to me.
Accusations.
Yes. So I am like my oldest son. I am a binge reader. So if I get into a book, it is
I lose you.
you lose me for all my free time. So I'm reading a story that's an 800-page fiction book that is so upsetting. It's like crack, though. I can't stop reading it, and it's so upsetting to me. And Dave this week said, I feel like this book is like a bad relationship. Like you can't quit it, but it's not good for you.
It's like you keep telling me like how it guts you. Literally,
It guts
every time
me. It guts
every time
me.
you come to the end of a chapter, you're like, I'm just so gutted. And I'm like, why are you? And yet you just go back. Like, I got to get back to reading. I got to get back to reading this. And
I
it really is
know.
like a bad. Like, it's like you saying you don't know this book the way that I know this book. And if only you knew it the way that I
know.
knew it,
I
you
know.
would. It's like it understands me.
I know.
It's like
It's a
Agreed.
really
Counseled-
good book once you get to know it.
Agreed.
I've counseled
Agreed.
people with this book before.
Agreed. I just can't stop it. And it just draws
it's
me
an
in.
addiction.
It's an addiction.
It's a bad addiction or
So
a
I'm-
good addiction.
So I'm into something that's not good for me right now, but it will end this weekend.
yes.
You gonna-
While I'm gone,
Yeah.
doing a wedding.
You gonna spill that tea and give us a name, or are you gonna?
Yeah. I mean, it came out a long time ago, and I tried to read it then, and for whatever reason didn't get into it, but it's The Goldfinch.
Have
you read it?
I've not read it, but I'm familiar.
And there's the initial primary relationship is a mother and her son. So there's such a beautiful mother-son relationship that kind of the whole book spirals from. So if you want to read a book that is a bad relationship, Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch. Join me in my dysfunction and codependency. All right.
Cool. Well, hey everyone. Thank you so much for listening,
Yep.
and we'll catch you next time.
Have a good weekend,
Bye.
whatever
See
day.
ya.
Bye.